The House Families and Veterans Committee will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Schmal,
Here.
Representatives Wozniak,
Here.
Fox,
Yep.
Johnson,
Here.
Thompson, Pavlo,
Here.
Wolford,
Present.
Young,
Here.
Burns, Rindins, Song.
Present.
Madam Chair, you have 9 members present, a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Representative Fox moves to adopt the minutes of October 28th without objections, so ordered. Our first order of business today is to hear testimony on House Bills 5035 through 5039 from Representatives Roth and Representative St. Germaine. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Appreciate your time today to hear some interesting testimony in a situation that I certainly didn't come to Lansing about. This was something that brought to me by a constituent in my very first year, 4 years plus ago. Unfortunately, first term, the bills made it through House Judiciary and Health Committee and Senate Health, and then died on the Senate floor. Unfortunately, they went home early that year, so it was a bad deal. Last term, we got them through to third reading a couple times, and then they just disappeared. We're not quite sure what happened, but every time they go to committee, they usually go pretty much unanimously. I did have one lawyer colleague that was worried about slippery slopes of people going to the bar and impregnating somebody and then saying they lied about their health or their education, that's a slippery slope. We're talking about a facility that does IVF control. This is not your bar travel. This is actually something where you go and expect to get professional services, and if it doesn't happen, that is a problem. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about fertility fraud. Again, the issue was brought to me a couple terms ago. My constituent learned through a use of a DNA test that her dad, she grew up with, thinking it was her biologic father, was not. It turned out that her whole world was going to be turned upside down when she found out the donor was actually the actual donor that her mom and dad brought to the IVF clinic. The DNA was actually thrown out. Was not used at all. A doctor that ran the clinic actually used his own DNA to inseminate mom, and that's fraud in my eyes, and I don't know how it wouldn't be fraud in anybody's eyes. She thought she was 100% Scottish, and you end up being half Jewish, where her biologic father was actually the mother's doctor. While preparing these bills, I learned of victims who chose their donor based on specific things that they wanted, going to a clinic, picking a specific donor also, and only to find out that that donor had lied about who they were. Instead of getting the Harvard graduate, we got a 9th grade dropout with mental health history. And the clinic did not look through that to make sure the donor was truthful and didn't do a health screening and history. So unfortunately, that client that picked that person, their son actually inherited the traits of the father who had mental health history and actually committed suicide at age 25. So what we're doing here isn't a knock on IVF. That's not anybody's desire in this group to actually knock IVF. It's to make sure when a woman or family goes to a clinic to get those services, that they get the service they ask for and make sure there's no fraudulent activity in that process. I think the amount of money that people pay to go to these clinics, they should get what they want and get to the services they ask for. So we just want to put guardrails on the service. We're not trying to do anything other than that. Make sure the right donors are indicated and that people get exactly what they're supposed to get. And I don't have to tell most of you, you've probably heard stories time after time on TV. There's a Netflix, My Father program where a doctor in Indiana actually inseminated somewhere around 1,000 women. So this isn't, again, this is only to curtail the activity and make sure that the guardrails are solid and that people get what they want. I do have Alicia St. Germaine, Representative St. Germaine, who also has one of the bills in the packet. Would love to testify also.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my bill, 5038, is what I call the hammer piece. So it amends the sentencing guidelines to individuals who provide false representation of reproductive procedures. It would be a charge of a Class E felony with a 5-year penalty. And then those who knowingly or recklessly use an embryo that was not agreed to by the patient could be charged as a Class E felony with a 15-year penalty. So I'm just going to tell a quick story. So long time ago, when I was a little kid, there were 3 things I knew I wanted to be one day. I wanted to be rich, I wanted to be a wife, and I wanted to be a mom. Well, 2 out of 3 isn't bad. I'm a legislator that drives a 2016 Nissan Rogue. So anyways, I'm lucky. I met the love of my life, knew when I wanted to plan a family, and that happened. I got pregnant with my daughter, and, everything was fine. But slight complications. So what I thought would be a normal delivery, I didn't go through that process. I had to have a C-section because she was upside down with the umbilical cord around her neck. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, why isn't my body doing what it was designed to do? Why the complications? What did I do wrong? And then when I came to terms of that thought process, what a silly thing to think about, like that it was so irrelevant. I was so lucky to be able to conceive and carry a baby and deliver a healthy baby. So I really can't imagine what women that want to conceive and have a baby, the feelings they go through. So with this legislation, I can't thank Rep. Roth and everybody that worked on it enough. I think it's important, and it's the very least we could do. I hope this package of bills makes it all the way through into the governor's desk. Thank you.
And I will say Rep. Steckloff is also on the package. She wasn't able to testify today, but supports it also. We've gone through a lot of process with this. The Attorney General's office, we spent a lot of time with the Attorney General making sure that we were doing the right thing and that we weren't overcharging or undercharging. At first, we did want to do a CAC against the doctors that did this against women. The Attorney General's office didn't believe it fit in that category the right way. So we worked out a lot of those issues that in over a 5-year period, we were able to get a lot of these things to the point where even the doctors that do this, at first they were a little bit upset, or I won't say it that way. They wanted some language change, and we worked with the doctors to get that done. So everybody seems to be on board. There's occasionally somebody that comes forward that's worries about some other outside things to this, but I think we've got this right where it needs to be. It's in the right timing. I think we can get this done this term. We do have people on Zoom today. Jamie Hall, who is my constituent that brought this to my attention, has been willing to testify quite often and also talk with the press. I give her a lot of courage for doing this. This was not an easy process that she went through herself, and we'd love to have a few minutes of her talking about this. So
Yes, before we go to her, and thank you for your testimony, and I went through a C-section too, the same type of thing, and so yes, we're very blessed to be able to have children on our own, and we want to make it easier for everybody to, be a mother or father. So, but we also want to protect everyone in the process. So thank you for bringing this forward. I think it's very important. How big is this problem? You mentioned a couple cases, and what happened to the doctor in your district?
Nothing. So the doctor this happened with in the Detroit area did it to multiple women. We're the Wild Wild West in Michigan right now. Had we passed this my first term, we had been like the number 5 state in the union to actually put guardrails on it. Now there's 20-some that have done it. So it's happening all the time. Indiana, Representative Whitsett told me this summer, she texted me quick, turn to CNN right now, turn it, hurry up. And so we turned to the channel and found out a brother and sister in Connecticut. Well, they didn't know they were brother and sister. They dated in high school, had a relationship, went their separate ways in college, came back to a class reunion, and found out that their mothers had been inseminated by the same doctor. Luckily, they didn't marry, didn't move on with that relationship, but these are the kind of things that are happening. It's not state of Michigan, it's all over the states. We are not unique. We're just a little slower than some of the other states at getting some guardrails on this process. And that's really what we're trying to do. But unfortunately, it's more widespread than I think we know, because there are some people that don't want to know their DNA. They were lucky enough to get pregnant. They had children. They have their children. They don't want to know today who did it. They just don't want to know that history. But others do. Right to know and know your health history in particular is really a desire for a lot of these people that have gone through IVF or are children of IVF. They want to know what their health histories are and things they may have to look for down the road. So that's a big one.
So we have a few questions.
Sure,
We do
go
have
ahead.
a few people on Zoom to speak to. So, Representative Wolford.
I don't have a question.
Oh.
Not yet. I
Okay.
usually do, but not right now.
Okay, sorry about that. Representative Song.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Roth and St. Germaine, for bringing forth this legislation and for your testimony. My question is in regards to those other states. Have you looked at what other states are doing? Because their class felonies are different. And is there a statute of limitation in this legislation? Because as we know, the process of finding out 40-some years later, I mean, will they still be able to prosecute and criminalize that?
A lot of them are too far down. And actually, Dr. Peven, who was the doctor out of Detroit area, is since passed away. He passed away at 104 years old. So a lot of these doctors either are passed away now. So the statute of limitations have pretty much expired. But we're hoping going forward that these guardrails would keep this from happening to women going forward.
What is the statute of limitation then if this were to be implemented?
I don't have that with me, but we can get you that answer
All right,
for sure.
thank you so
I
much.
don't want to say that I'll look it up for
Got
sure.
it. Thank
We'll
you
get
so
that
much.
one.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Representative Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you both representatives for being here. Two questions quickly. So we talk about the time limits on filing. It says up to 3 years after you make. Who do they report? Like, how does the clock start so that you know officially, all right, this is when I found out this happened, and now I know I have 3 years?
Yeah, that will be through the prosecutor's office. You'll have to verify when you found out, maybe a DNA test or any other kind of paperwork, and then you'll go to the prosecutor's office of your county and go from there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rep. Pavlov.
Oh, that's it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony. Is there any safeguards about whether the insemination would be accidental or intentional?
Yeah, it's in the bill. It has to be intentional. If there is a mishandling, that you're not going to get. It's in there that you don't want to mishandle. So they can find a small fine on that, but it's not a misdemeanor or felony. Yeah, it has to be intentional, and most of these cases have been intentional. I mean, there's no doubt. But right now, that wouldn't even matter. There was one time where a case was brought against Dr. Peven in a civil manner, but the court system couldn't assign a dollar figure to the problem. So it was actually thrown out. We didn't have any law. How do you assess a fine or damage when you given birth, but wasn't to what you wanted? So,
Okay, we'll go to Rep. Burns, and then we'll go to testimony.
Thank you, Representative Roth.
yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for your testimony and for your work on this important issue. I think my question probably is most tailored to Representative St. Germaine around the penalty portion. I understand just based on my notes here that if essentially a member of the general public were to knowingly falsely inseminate someone, that it would be punishable by no more than 5 years in prison. And if someone did the same thing but they were a medical professional, it would be punishable by no more than 15 years in prison. And I certainly understand and appreciate a harsher penalty for a medical professional who's doing this under the auspices of their title in a trusted position. Can you tell me, are these penalties, the no more than 5 years or no more than 15 years, are those similar to what we're seeing in the other 20 or so states that have similar legislation?
They do. I can answer that because I worked, and Kira will be able to answer that on the Zoom when she comes on too. I believe Kira's a lawyer. I don't want to badmouth her if she's not.
No offense to the attorneys out there.
Right. But I think she can give that too. I think it really does mirror other states. And it does mirror, through Michigan law, working with the Attorney General's office, it mirrored what they thought was reasonable. We went harsher at the beginning, and the Attorney General said, don't think so. I think that's too much, especially the donor part, the donor doing it intentionally like this one person did. That got reduced quite a bit. We wanted a felony, I believe it's a misdemeanor. If I'm not mistaken, up to possibly 5 years.
Yep, I'm showing a Class E felony
Oh,
and
okay.
no more than 5 years. And then the other would be a Class C, no more than 15.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, we double checked, and I'll have Kira when she comes on to talk about that more.
perfect. Thank
Sure.
you so much.
Yep.
Thank you, Representatives. Now we'll have testimony from Jamie Hall, who will speak on the need for the bills, and they're all on Zoom. So, Jamie, anytime you want to start. There she is.
Hi. Thank you for having me. This is a very important thing for me to be here. I've told my story many times, as painful as it is to tell. There's such an importance to tell it, so it doesn't happen to other women, other families. In my particular story, my mom and dad tried for 8 years to have children unsuccessfully, and found Dr. Peven, who was spoken about earlier, and he told my parents that, first of all, I have an older sister. After 8 years of trying, and they went to this doctor, my parents had my older sister. At the time, they had my dad do, say he didn't have strong swimmers, or wasn't able to have children unless he did hormone treatment and wore loose clothes and gave lots of things that he could do to help them have children. And yeah, my sister was born, and 2 years later, I was born. When they went back to the same doctor for me, the doctor told him that, again, my dad didn't have, a strong sperm count, and that it would be more helpful if there could be a donor along with my father. And believe it or not, they told my mom that it would be both. They didn't do that with my sister, but they did with me. And so my mom, she's Scottish and proud of it. And so she went to a friend who is also Scottish to to be a donor. And my mom brought that in. And I was born. But unfortunately, I was born in fraud, because years later, when I did my DNA test, 2019, it showed up that I wasn't 50% or 100% Scottish, that I was 50% Scottish and 50% Ashkenazi Jew. And when I discovered that, I also discovered names along with it, and figured out who my biological father was, which was the doctor, my mom's doctor that she went to help her. And my mother had passed away, which is a really good thing, because that would have been so painful for her and my father. My father had had a stroke, and I didn't share this information with them. But it just was shocking to me, and it would have been shocking to her. So I tell my story over and over again in hopes that it wouldn't happen to other families or other people to have something so deceptive happen to them. Obviously, I'm happy I'm here, but being a product of the fraud that my mother went through and the unethical way that the doctor went about it, it's just important that other families, other men and women are protected. I have siblings from the same doctor that are younger than my own children. And he started his practice in 1950. He also donated sperm in 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. I have siblings born in the 80s. It's a sad story, but I'm here in front of you to help hopefully put some laws in place so this doesn't happen to other families.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate that you came here to tell your story. And I'm sorry that it was that painful for you, but we're glad you're here. Do we have any questions?
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Next, we're going to have testimony from Kara Dyerin, the head of the Right to Know organization.
Hi. Thank you for having me today, Chairperson and members of the committee. I also want to thank Representative Roth for his leadership in reintroducing this bipartisan legislation to protect Michigan families and ensure honesty in assisted reproduction. His doggedness in this issue has been greatly appreciated. I know Jamie, Lynn, and I are very happy to have such a champion of the issue. As you said, I'm the co-founder of Right to Know, and we're a national nonprofit organization that advocates for people impacted by misattributed parentage. That's people conceived through adoption, assisted reproduction, or other circumstances where their genetic identity doesn't match what they were told. And you had some questions about other legislation that's passed in this area. And if you go to our website, righttoknow.us, and look under advocacy and fertility fraud, you'll see a list of the states that have passed similar legislation. And the range is from 6 months to 20 years, with it being 5 years the average, and then for the medical professionals, a harsher penalty if they do commit fraud themselves. And what most people don't understand is fertility fraud. I mean, fertility is a multi-billion industry. We all know that. It's actually projected to reach $40 billion next year. But in the United States, the only federal legislation that we have is the requirement to test donors for communicable diseases. There's no requirement to genetically test gametes, no requirement to verify donor information like medical history, education, or background. And there's no way to ensure a limit on how many families are created from one donor. I just have to say, we passed legislation in Iowa, and the senator there really understood the issue because she practiced animal husbandry. And she said, wow, in the United States, animal husbandry is more regulated than this. And that's true. Clinics, doctors, and donors continue to misrepresent information because there's no meaningful checks and balance. Why are donors lying in clinics, making false promises, and doctors using their own sperm? It's because there's a high financial incentive for them to do so. And there's no accountability at all. You know, this is one of the most intimate decisions people make, and they're relying entirely on the information provided to them by the clinics and the donors, information that they cannot independently verify. They're also often emotionally vulnerable and desperate to start a family, and we have to protect these parents and future children from exploitation. And I hope Michigan can do that. Unfortunately, as you guys were talking about earlier, when victims discover the truth, it's usually later in life, and there's usually no legal recourse. Why is this? Attorneys often decline representing fertility fraud because courts have, in many of these cases, found that offspring don't have standing because they weren't part of the contract and they weren't born when the wrongdoing occurred. Mothers are often also left without a remedy because, as you guys talked about, the statute of limitations has told by the time the discovery happens, which is what's so great about this set of bills is the statute of limitations starts after the discovery is made. And like you discussed, it would be determined by the prosecuting attorney. I am a recovering attorney. And, you know, most people find this out when the children take a DNA test. And we do that, like we have a child of our own, something's happened, we get it randomly for a Christmas present. So this is why that statute of limitations is really so important. I think I'll stop there and just say that every child really deserves to know the truth of their genetic origins, and every parent deserves informed consent. And every doctor and clinic should be held to the same ethical standards we expect in every other area of medicine. We would not permit fraud in other aspects of medicine. Michigan has the opportunity to ensure transparency and accountability and honesty in assisted reproduction. We need to prevent fraud in the making of a human being. No one should ever have to take a DNA test to learn about their ancestry and discover deceit. So thank you for taking the time to listen.
Thank you for being here to testify, and you can disregard Rep. Roth's statement about lawyers. Just pretend that never happened. How many states did you say are looking to enact penalties on this type of behavior?
Well, right now there's 14. My total, it changes. I have 14 documented with what their penalties are on the website, and every year 1 to 5 states join in that, depending. California was the first state, and it actually started with a technician swapping sperm out for his own sperm.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. Do we have any questions? Yeah, Rep. Burns?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony today. I appreciate it. My question is somewhat similar to the question I asked our representatives earlier. Can you tell me, do other states have penalties for donors who unknowingly or willingly misrepresent their information? So do other states have the felony penalties? I'll start there, and then I have another part of the question.
Yes, other states do have that, and they do have it. I mean, you got to remember, fraud's a really high bar. It's not lying, it's knowingly lying, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you don't know and you say something, that's not fraud. Mm-hmm. Iowa and I think Nevada, mm-hmm. and there's a couple other states, but I know Iowa and Nevada have this scope of penalties already enacted.
Okay, thank you. And then, Madam Chair, if I may, just a second part to the question. To the best of my knowledge, the bills before us today would include felony as a penalty for knowingly misrepresenting information, but that would include knowingly misrepresenting your level of education. Just curious of your thoughts on that. I can understand, like, knowingly or willingly misrepresenting, a medical history or something of that nature that would could severely impact, a child were it to be born with that person's DNA. Can you talk to me about the level of education component?
I can, and I actually also think Lynn will offer some personal testimony about that herself. Mm-hmm. But I can just say, I've had some legislators ask me about this very specific question, mm-hmm. and they're like, people lie all the time on dating apps, right? Mm-hmm. You put your best inflated self forward when you fill out a dating app because you want to get people to swipe. I don't know, was it left or right? I've been married 30 years. I haven't used one, but whichever way you swipe, that's what you're going for, right? But the thing is you get to go meet that person. So if they tell you that they have a PhD from Harvard, when you meet them, you can figure out for yourself, are they a smart cookie or not? Is this somebody that I would like to have a relationship with and maybe eventually have children? Mm-hmm. The problem with assisted reproduction in the United States is we have anonymity, and there's no way for the parent to verify the veracity of the information provided by the donors. And so it does make a difference. We do know things are inheritable beyond just weight and eye color and health aspects. In our spaces, we call them synchronicities, and it's amazing. You can get 15 donors together, and they, the offspring siblings of one donor, and they'll have lunch, and they'll all order their sandwich with no mayo. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they inherited that trait. Mm-hmm. We don't really know the extent of our heritable information. Mm-hmm. It's a science that we need to do more studies on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that information. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. Obviously, fraud is fraud, lying is lying, so we can understand that. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Next, we're going to listen to Lynn Spencer, who'd like to testify in the bills.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for hearing our testimony today about fertility fraud. My parents also used a sperm donor to conceive. My name's Lynn Weiner Spencer, by the way, and I'm a nurse and a master's level psychologist. And I did my master's thesis on the experience of being donor conceived. So I found out at age 35 that I was donor conceived. I have one sister who's 3 years younger than I am. And our parents always told us they had gone to see a fertility specialist after not being able to conceive for 4 years. But what we didn't know anything about was that a donor was involved. So when I was 35, my dad passed away. And then within a few days, our mom told us that there had been a donor involved. She thought it was really important for us to know that. And my dad hadn't wanted us to know that. So while being a parent is a wonderful thing, and, it would be lovely if anybody who wanted to be a parent could easily get pregnant. So as people were saying before, we support IVF under ethical circumstances. So what are some of the problems? We've already talked about some of the problems with using donor gametes. So we've some of the lies that occur are about education, careers, and the medical histories. And in my case, you had asked the question about the education. My parents were told that their donor was a medical student. After finding out who my biological father was through DNA tests, he in fact had a 9th grade education and GED. And, that's not to say that he didn't have intellectual abilities, but just the fact that the doctor lied about that is problematic. I think, the lack of oversight is really troublesome. I think right now the most compelling thing that is preventing some of these things from happening is the advent of consumer DNA testing, such as Ancestry.com and 23andMe. People now have the ability to find out their genetic relationships. And even if the donor themselves doesn't test, there's the process of triangulation where you can get back to the source by looking at relatives of theirs that have tested. So secrecy is no longer, anonymity is no longer, people are no longer capable of being anonymous donors. Another issue personal to me is the number of offspring produced from a single donor. Fertility practitioners make claims, for example, that they use a donor for 5 to 10 families, but over and over again through DNA testing, this has been proven to be wrong. Currently, I have 82 DNA confirmed half siblings, and it's really overwhelming to keep up with all these relationships. We do connect with each other through the DNA sites. I've met about half of them. There was also a mention about mental health. My donor's family has a history of substance and substance abuse and depression and suicide. And in fact, one of my half siblings committed suicide last year. So I did early on back in 1992 when I found out about this. I found a support group which included about 6 donor offspring and 1 donor who happened to be from Detroit. So I've had many conversations with him. He told me that during the time frame when I was conceived, he knew the doctor that my parents went to. He said that doctor had 1 donor who had donated for 30 years and had over 3,000 offspring, and 15 donors who had over 1,000 offspring. And my donor siblings, we do range in age 30 years. So, well, Jamie, I guess yours do too. Another issue that's come to my mind that I just want to mention, the same donor told me that he and other donors at the fertility clinic use a process he called NI, natural insemination. And this is where the donor has sexual intercourse with the woman in the office for the purpose of getting pregnant. So clearly, the fertility industry has been operating behind closed doors with very limited oversight. It's the hen guarding the hen house, and I strongly urge you to help this legislation pass to prevent further fertility fraud in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here, and sorry that you and your family went through that, and hopefully these bills will help that situation. No questions. Maybe you should have put in there that everybody's financially responsible for all the offspring. That's right. You know, I think that would stop everybody right there.
I'd like to add one thing to Rep. Burns. Understand completely, and so we did talk to multiple prosecutors so that there wasn't a situation where somebody went through medical school and they got to be a 3rd year and they dropped out. No one's going to prosecute them for saying they were a doctor, but when it's so far-fetched from a Harvard graduate down to a 9th grade dropout, that would be something that would trigger definitely a prosecution. But yeah.
Sure.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative, for that additional information. And I just want to make sure I'm hearing you right, and please let me know if I'm not. Am I right in understanding then that there would be like prosecutorial discretion with regard to that component?
It certainly will. I mean, it always does with the prosecutors, whether they take the case or not. But the several that we talked to, including mine from Grand Traverse County, I did talk to her directly, that they have to be careful. If they took a case with that little bit of difference,
Right.
they know they're going to lose that case or potentially lose that case. So
Okay.
it really had to be egregious
Okay,
for
got
them
it.
to do that.
Okay, so we're not talking like razor's edge here. Okay,
Now,
thank you for that
if
clarification.
someone said they were a doctor and they never even took doctor school,
Sure.
that's going to be a problem.
Okay,
Right.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further questions, we thank you for being here. And Rep. St. Germain, on the 3rd goal, you still have time for that one. So good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 2 cards to read in. Amy Zagman in support of the bill, Michigan Council for Maternal and Child Health. She would like to speak. This one, and then we have Stephanie Jones, who is opposed to the bill from Michigan Fertility Alliance, and I understand you would like to say a few words. Okay. Just push the red button.
Hi, thank you so much. Good afternoon. It is afternoon. First, I do want to thank Jamie and Lynn for their testimony. My name is Stephanie Jones, and I am both the president of the Michigan Fertility Alliance, which we are the leading expert on fertility and family building policy in our state, and I'm also the co-founder of State Strong, a national coalition of state-level pro-family family bill or pro-fertility policy advocates and experts. We represent patients and families who rely on IVF, donor conception, and surrogacy to build their families that they dream of. I am also a mother through surrogacy, and many of the families who support Michigan Fertility Alliance have children born through donor egg, donor sperm, or both. We also work directly with children and young adults who are both born through donor conception. So this issue isn't theoretical for us. It's deeply personal. We know these families and we are these families. So let me begin by stating this clearly. We support accountability and we appreciate the good intent of this bill package, but the practical impact will be catastrophic for Michigan families. The bills before you today, HB 5035 through 5039, go far beyond good intent. They are wolf in sheep's clothes. What you have before us now is a 5-bill package totaling thousands of words. You have to stop and ask, what is being hidden in all of that language? This is not a simple protection bill. It's model legislation from a fringe group with ulterior motives, repackaged to sound like patient protection. In reality, it poses grave threats to Michigan families. They exploit the lack of understanding around the nuances and ripple effect of fertility policy. Doctors using their own sperm during fertility treatments is a relic of the past. Fertility medicine and donor conception today operate under much different, rigorous, ethical, professional, and legal standards, and informed consent, safeguards, and strict chain of custody procedures. This legislation, however, is written as if none of that exists. One of the most concerning provisions is how dangerously vague this language is. Under this bill package, a physician would be criminally liable if a donor fails to accurately report the medical history of their first, second, or third degree relatives. That's almost an impossible standard. We are talking about holding doctors criminally responsible if a donor doesn't perfectly know or report the health histories of their first cousins and great-grandparents. I know I certainly couldn't. That's unworkable, it's unreasonable, and it's dangerous. These bills would criminalize good physicians for things far beyond their control, including any inaccurate or incomplete information provided by a donor. Research shows that even under the best conditions, 10 to 30% of people accidentally misreport parts of their medical history. That's human error, not fraud. Yet, under this bill package, a doctor could face a felony conviction up to 15 years in prison for using the egg or sperm of a donor who unknowingly omits or misstates an uncle's medical condition or the number of college credits completed. This is absurd and deeply dangerous. Equally troubling is the inclusion of the phrase social history of the donor, and I quote, which this legislation defines as the personal and sexual history of the donor pertaining to risk factors for relevant communicable diseases transmittable via gamete donations. Just to be clear, a donor gamete is defined as donor egg or donor sperm. We refer to it as donor gamete. This language is grossly inappropriate and completely unnecessary for 2 reasons. Number 1, the FDA requires all donor gametes to be tested for communicable diseases to ensure safety. Federal law mandates through screening, medical history review, and physical examinations. Donors are tested for HIV, Hep B, Hep C, syphilis, chlamydia, gonorrhea, and more. The FDA also requires documentation strict record keeping. Donors who test positive or are deemed ineligible are not permitted to donate. In other words, the system already works. I know this firsthand because my husband and I had to go through this exact process because we were considered donors to our surrogate. The bill goes further, and this is where it really crosses a line. What does social history really mean in this context? Does it mean a donor could face criminal consequences for failing to list an intimate partner from years ago? Does a misdisclosure about a past relationship make someone a criminal? That's an outrageous government overreach into people's private lives and has nothing to do with protecting the patient or children. So you can see how overreaching, vague, and stunningly broad and harmful this legislation is. It weaponizes personal history and criminalizes impossibly broad standards. It's fear-mongering, not policy, and the consequences for Michigan families would be catastrophic. Faced with such liability, many fertility specialists will stop offering medical treatment involving gamete involving donor gametes, which many families rely on to start or grow. Clinics will close programs, patients will be forced out of state for care, and at a time when Michigan already faces a declining birth rate, this package of bills would make it even harder for families to grow. If lawmakers are truly interested in protecting fertility treatments and family building, then let's focus on meaningful legislation, like ending insurance companies' exclusion that deny fertility care. 1 in 6 people experience infertility, nearly half of them are men. The number one barrier to having children for a Michigander with infertility is lack of insurance coverage. We want to strengthen families and Michigan's futures. We should be working to ensure Michiganders can access the fertility care they need to bring more babies home, to grow, to thrive, and to stay here in Michigan, not add more barriers. To summarize, because I appreciate your time and I know the committee has heard a lot this afternoon, Michigan Fertility Alliance wants to protect patients without harming the care. But this 5 package is not that. It's a wolf in sheep's clothes, and it risks dismantling modern fertility care in Michigan under the guise of protection. And perhaps most telling, Michigan Fertility Alliance, the very organization that wrote and passed the Michigan Family Protection Act earlier this year, was never consulted, nor were our panel of legal experts. If the state's nonpartisan leading experts were excluded, that should tell you everything you need to know. Chair and members, I urge you to vote no on HB 5035 through 5039 and instead work with the experts, with patients, physicians, and advocates to craft smart, modern legislation that truly protects families without destroying their ability to grow. And before I go, please know that Michigan Fertility Alliance is happy to work with any lawmaker who wants to work collaboratively. And thank you for standing with Michigan families. And just a couple of points that I want to correct from the testimony prior to. First of all, we work with all the clinics in the state of Michigan. It's kind of the nature of our work as a Michigan Fertility Alliance. I can tell you that not one fertility doctor is excited about this type of legislation because it is so vague, it would make their job basically impossible to use donor gametes. So therefore, as doctors do, they are going to remove risk and not do that. Second thing I want to correct is there are 14 states that have a quote-unquote fertility fraud type of legislation, but it is very narrow. We're talking like 200 words of written legislation that singly criminalize the doctor, and that's it. Not education requirements for not stating, your, like you had stated, education or additional things along those lines. So there's that. And there's only one other state that has anything even remotely close to this, but this is by far the most vague, broad interpretation of the model legislation from the organization you heard from that we are seeing across the country. Also, just to be clarified, the Attorney General's office, they can consult on punishment, right? But this does not mean an endorsement for this type of legislation, which I think that needs to be clarified. Also,
Yeah, I think you ready? Are you done?
yes, just one more thing.
Okay.
And then also, and I know that Rep. Roth had brought this up in the past or earlier, is why this didn't advance. It didn't advance before because it is, as you can see, it's flawed, it's vague, and it's really broad and has many, many consequences. So thank you for your time. I am open for questions.
Yes, thank you for being here. You said the system is working. It obviously isn't working because we're still having these issues. And you also said when they're misrepresenting themselves, what it says intentionally misrepresenting themselves. So could you expound on those two things?
Correct. As I stated, what we are hearing about is we are legislating kind of on a relic of the past, right? Modern medicine is not practiced the way it was 30, 40, 50 years ago in terms of how we are doing assisted reproduction and families grow through IVF. There are many safeguards that weren't in place when you heard from these people testimony that are in place today. And then your second question
But this is still happening, so it's not like it's not happening. This is still happening.
This is, I would say it is very, 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 very rare. I can't even think of a case that I know within the past 30 years that has happened. It's very rare.
It has.
Maybe there have been, but we're talking about a legal precedent. But we have to be thinking about from the standpoint of the legislation in terms of it's very broad, very vague, the way it is written. If we are talking about the action of wanting to criminalize a doctor, Michigan Fertility Alliance had that solution. We offered that to Rep. Roth, and that was 200 words of legislation, and it would have done the case as it does in Utah and across the state, or across in other states.
Okay, we have a couple questions. Let's go to Rep. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a few really quick, short questions. You mentioned that you believe that this legislation is only being put forward because the group has ulterior motives. Could you give a couple examples of those ulterior motives you think they have?
I think, being concerned about shutting down donor conception, that could be a potential reason for wanting to advance legislation that is
From the sponsors of the legislation or from the groups that testified
from the
today?
group. From the group.
So that you think the group might want to shut down donor?
Or constrict or restrict who can use it. And that is what we're seeing across the country when it comes to donor gametes in this type of legislation.
Why would they want to restrict that if that's the only means for some women to be able to have children?
That's a great question. That's what we ask all the time, and we can't get an answer because this type of legislation would do exactly that. It would prohibit doctors in the state of Michigan for taking on the risk and the liability of using donor gametes. Therefore, they would not transfer donor gametes. And I'm not a doctor, so I would love to get doctors in front of here so you can hear directly from them and what that would mean for their practice.
I think that would probably be a good idea because I'm not a doctor either, but I am a nurse and I'm held to a higher standard. I can be charged for many things in my practice as a nurse. And that's kind of going into the next question. Is it fair to say that people break the law?
Absolutely.
Is it fair to say that healthcare professionals break the law?
Absolutely.
So it would be fair to say that even though there are federal guidelines and regulations around this industry and how these healthcare workers and doctors are to carry themselves and what is legal and not legal, it's still fair to say that people do break the law and that there are bad actors and that those bad actors should be punished for breaking the law. Would that be fair to say?
I think that's why we have oversight committees like the licensure board and things along those lines for health providers. I mean, that's
So you don't feel that they should be legally responsible, like criminally?
I think it would depend on, obviously, we stated that we believe accountability is important, but when you're talking about such vague guidelines as someone's social history, we don't even know what that means. What does that mean? How can they be held accountable for things that we can't define? And we heard earlier from Rep. Roth stating about discretion of a prosecutor. That we shouldn't be writing laws that are so vague that they're gray and nobody knows how to interpret them. Our laws should be very clear, like we had stated. We had 200 words of legislation that we could have passed that said, if you want to criminalize a doctor, this is how you go ahead and do it. And that wasn't even entertained. So that's my question. Why weren't we entertaining this to achieve what you're kind of referring to?
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Rep. Bulford?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Basically, you asked my question already, but I'll ask it again. So basically, on your comment of that this is a thing of the past, you'd mentioned that there were no cases in the last 40 years, but there are cases, 80s, 90s, 2000s. So I feel like that was a misrepresentation of
Correction, legal cases. Legal, I meant as in legal proceedings. If there are cases, they're going through the process and we don't have legal precedent yet. But what I'm saying is what we are talking about specifically in response to the people testifying, this would have been a relic of the past. And that's the reality of the situation. I'm not saying that it wouldn't or it hasn't happened since, but it's very, very rare. Mm-hmm. And we do not have legal precedent as of 30 to 40 years ago.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of crimes that happen, sometimes rare, but that doesn't mean we don't put law forth on them. Also, Madam Chair, I just want to make sure, we're talking about taking sperm, putting it in a woman, and then making sure that we're telling the truth to these families of where that came from in the past and where it's coming from. Am I reading that correctly? Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And if we had more laws on the books, we probably would have more legal precedents to deal with that. This is just all about protecting people who go to fertility clinics and just making sure that they're getting the right information. I don't think that's asking too much, but I appreciate your testimony. Do you have any final words?
No, I do appreciate the opportunity. And like I said, we represent the Michigan families that are start and grow through assisted reproduction, including IVF and surrogacy. So again, we were not consulted at all on this bill package.
Okay, thank you very much.